The story begins with Lost standing inside the Adventurers Guild, holding a paper stating that he wishes to join a party. Suddenly, a girl named Narsena appears before him. She is a martial artist, and for some reason, she is incredibly attached to him and desperately wants to form a party with him. Lost stands there in shock, unable to understand why she is so determined to stick by his side. The receptionist approaches and tries to stop her from joining him, saying, "Young lady, you're going to regret this." Then she pulls her aside and begins explaining who he is. "Do you even know who this person is? This is Lost, the fool who was kicked out of the party Ansel al-Bark." But Narsena remains firm in her decision and refuses to back down. The receptionist says to her, "Give up on this idea. He's nothing more than a failed healer. He won't help you achieve your goals, and he won't even help you earn the money you're after." At that moment, Narsena pulls out a bag overflowing with money and says, "See, I'm not interested in money at all. I want to join him and work alongside him." The receptionist reaches the peak of frustration, completely unsure how to deal with her. Narsena leaves her behind and rushes straight toward Lost, telling him that she wants only him and no one else. Then she says, "If you come with me, we'll be our dream team forever." Lost takes her and heads over to submit the registration form to the receptionist. Narsena doesn't understand what's happening, but the receptionist explains that this is a contract that must be established between all parties to ensure the rights of everyone involved. Narsena simply replies, "Okay." Lost signs the contract, and the girl signs it after him as well. The receptionist congratulates them and gives them the very first quest of their lives. The mission takes place inside a labyrinth called Murdot. The two of them set out and begin making their way through the area, while Lost explains the labyrinth to Narsena. She says, "But the receptionist told us not to enter the labyrinth right away. We're still beginners." Lost then explains that there are many regions surrounding the labyrinth because of the magical energy radiating from it. First is the mountainous region to the east, followed by the northern forest, as well as the wetlands in the south, all of which are inhabited by powerful monsters. To the west, however, lie grasslands where the monsters are weak, making it a suitable place for beginners like us. But it's a vast area, and finding monsters there isn't easy. That's why I decided we should head into the labyrinth and advance through the upper floors, where there aren't any predatory monsters. The two of them proceed and enter the labyrinth. Narsena says, "Let me take the lead since I'm a martial artist. You stay in the back as the healer." Lost replies, "No problem. Let's go." As they move forward, they encounter a group of goblins. Narsena immediately charges in, crushing them and breaking their bones with ease, while Lost gathers the jewels and says, "We'll take these back to the guild and sell them." Narsena asks him, "And what are we going to do with these jewels?" Lost replies, "It's embarrassing for an adventurer not to know how jewels are used. They're used to extract magical energy, which is then utilized in crafting tools." She asks, "Do they bring in a lot of money?" He answers, "They barely cover the cost of a single night at an inn. Goblin jewels aren't worth much. We need to grow stronger and hunt more powerful monsters." Narsena says, "Let's go." They venture deeper into the labyrinth before suddenly falling into a ground trap that nearly kills Narsena. However, Lost saves her at the very last moment. She asks him, "How did you know?" He replies, "The color of the tile changed. Besides, I've been an adventurer for a long time and have some experience." They continue onward until they spot a monster of intermediate rank, one that shouldn't even exist on the upper floors of the labyrinth, leaving both of them utterly stunned. Narsena asks, "Should we run?" Lost replies, "If we work together, we'll defeat it easily." She says, "Let's do it." She rushes forward and attacks the monster, but to no avail. It feels as though she's striking solid rock. Not a single blow she lands has any effect on it. The monster then delivers a powerful strike that sends her crashing to the ground. Before it can finish her off, Lost intervenes and completely annihilates the monster. Narsena gets back up in shock and says, "Why didn't I die? And how could a healer like him kill it?" Lost replies, "Didn't I tell you? I've been an adventurer for a long time and have some experience." He heals her wounds, and together they examine the jewels that dropped from the monster. Narsena says, "These are bigger than the ones we got before." Lost responds, "Not only that, but they're also more valuable, and their magical power is much stronger." They return to the guild to sell the jewels they collected. The receptionist tells them that this is an Aurak jewel, and that they must have entered the labyrinth and descended deep into its lower floors. Lost immediately replies, "That never happened. It was Aurak that had moved upward." But the receptionist doesn't believe him. Narsena tries to reassure her that Lost is telling the truth, but the receptionist remains skeptical. She tells them that the rumors going around might actually be true, and that the labyrinth's monsters seem to be increasing in number. Lost asks her, "Did you figure that out on your own?" She replies, No, just take your share of the money and leave Narsena's share for her. And don't do what the party Ansel Al-Bark used to do to you. Narsena asks, what did they do to him? The receptionist, whose name is Amarst, answers, they used to steal what was rightfully his and make fun of him with ridiculous tricks. Narsena says, shouldn't the guild restore his rights? Amarst responds, do you want to file a complaint against them, my boy? Lost replies, no, it's over. We don't want to go back to the past. I'm in a much better party now. The two leave the guild, but during all of this, someone has been watching them. His name is Hans, the guild master, and the true power behind Amarst. He approaches her and asks about Lost. She replies, yes, he was here. He formed a party and has been taking on quests as well. Hans asks, did he form a party with a blue-haired girl? She replies, yes, a girl named Narsena. We then return to Lost and Narsena, who head to an inn to rent 2 separate rooms. Narsena secretly wishes they could rent just 1 room so they could stay together, but she can't bring herself to say it. So the two of them head upstairs to rest. From there, we shift briefly into the past, where we see Narsena as a child. She had been walking alone when bandits attacked her and nearly killed her. But at that very moment, Lost appeared, saved her from them, and healed her wounds. Back then, she told him that when she grew up, she would become an adventurer, form a party with him, and protect him for the rest of her life. That was why she had been so attached to him at the guild, and so determined to join his party specifically. However, she was saddened that he didn't remember her or pay any attention to her. She kept convincing herself that she had changed and grown up, that even her hair color had changed, yet she still couldn't understand how people could consider him a fool despite his immense strength. We then learn the reason behind that reputation. People gave him the nickname The Fool because of an old incident from the time he was still part of his former party, Ansel Al-Bark. During one of their quests, they were fighting a monster called the Hydra. One of the party members, a girl named Spiria, had been poisoned, and Lost was treating her. She asked him to remove the poison from her body, but he explained that the medicine required to cure her was extremely expensive, and he simply couldn't afford to buy it. Meanwhile, their teammate Maro was unable to face the Hydra on his own, so he called for Spiria's help. However, she was unable to move. He then summoned Armia to assist them, and she cast a fire spell, but it had no effect whatsoever on the Hydra. Furious, Maro abandoned them and fled, and Armia followed him as well. As for Spiria, she couldn't escape. Lost carried her in his arms and managed to save her from the battle. After they returned to the guild, Maro immediately began shouting and accused Lost in front of everyone, claiming that he was the reason for their defeat. Spiria agreed with his accusations and started scolding Lost as well. Everyone watched the scene in disbelief until Spiria said, let's ask Armia, she's just a child and she wouldn't lie. Armia raised her hand and pointed directly at Lost. From that moment on, he was expelled from the party and became known by the nickname, The Fool. We return once again to Lost, who continued to live under the burden of recurring nightmares that prevented him from moving on from his past. Back when he had first started working as a healer, he joined a party affiliated with the Adventurers Guild. However, that party never treated him like a healer. Instead, they used him as bait during quests, constantly placing him in danger. On one occasion, while he was walking alone, drowning in depression, fear, and pain, he came across a group of goblins chasing a little girl. Lost didn't hesitate for even a second. He immediately stepped in and stood against the goblins until he received a blow to the head that knocked him unconscious. When he finally woke up, he found the little girl standing before him. She said, "You saved me just in time." Lost looked around and noticed that the area was filled with soldiers. The girl then reassured him, saying, "Don't worry, these are the kingdom's guards. They arrived after you saved me." That little girl was Narsena during her childhood. Although Lost had no idea at the time, she later grew up and fulfilled the promise she had made to him, while Lost spent all those years holding on to the words she had spoken after he rescued her, when she told him that he had displayed courage greater than that of any adventurer. However, Lost had been convinced back then that this little girl would never become an adventurer because, in his eyes, she was the king's daughter. After that incident, Lost slowly regained hope. He began searching for a mentor who could teach him magic so that he could become a powerful adventurer, rather than remaining just a healer. He continued living with the hope of one day meeting the little girl he had once saved, until his passion for life finally returned. Suddenly, his thoughts are interrupted by Narsena calling him to breakfast. Afterward, the two of them head straight toward the labyrinth to earn their living. Lost suggests that they venture deeper into the labyrinth that day, and Narsena doesn't object. Lost takes her to a magical circle. Narsena looks around curiously and asks, Will this circle transport us? Lost explains that transportation only works if there is another matching circle at the destination. Narcena comments that this sounds dangerous, since monsters could potentially use it to attack cities. Lost replies that only humans can use these circles. The two step into the magical circle, which transports them to the lower floor of the labyrinth. There, they encounter monsters of various forms that are much stronger than the goblins they had fought before. Excited, Narcena charges forward to attack them, but Lost stops her and explains that this type of monster isn't affected by close-range attacks. Instead, it must be attacked from a distance, and magic is the preferred method of dealing with it. He suggests retreating, but she refuses and says that she has an idea. Narcena uses Lost as bait before hiding behind a pillar and gathering her magical energy. The monster charges directly toward Lost, and Narcena leaps out from her hiding place, delivering a decisive strike that kills it instantly. However, she suffers severe injuries in the process. Lost immediately steps in and heals her. Then the two of them collect the monster's jewel and return to the guild. There, Amarst is astonished by the value of the jewels they obtained. She pays them their reward, and they leave. Back in the city, they stroll through the streets and enjoy the fruits of their hard work. They go out for dinner, spend time having fun, and freely use the money they earned that day. While they are sitting together, Narcena notices towering structures that have neither doors nor windows. She asks Lost about them, but he admits that he knows nothing about them either. He tells her that all anyone knows is that the king ordered their construction and no one knows the reason behind it. As long as they harm no one, they remain untouched. Lost suggests that it would be wiser to build a wall around the city to protect it from potential attacks, but Narcena confidently replies that the city is full of adventurers, and any enemy would be defeated with ease. After finishing their meal, they head off to sleep. Narcena keeps certain feelings hidden deep within her heart, wanting to say something but never finding the courage to do so. As for Lost, he feels at peace because he is still living, thanks to the hope that little girl gave him long ago. Elsewhere, the party Ansal al-Bark was delighted to welcome a new healer named Lara into their ranks. At the same time, Hans, the guildmaster, was sitting with a priest and asking about Lost, only to learn that Lost was now part of a party alongside a girl named Narcena. Meanwhile, Maro gathers the party and heads out to confront the Hydra. He orders Lara to move forward and act as bait, just as he had previously forced Lost to do. However, she refuses and says that she is merely a healer and has nothing to do with combat. Maro regrets it immediately, realizing that Lara won't be nearly as useful to him as he had expected. We return once more to the guild, where Lost and Narcena present the jewels they acquired that day. Amarst says to them, "It would be best if you added a powerful warrior and a mage to your party so that you could earn even greater rewards." Lost replies, "No, we don't need anyone else with us. We get what we want anyway, thank God." Amarst says, "You're actually right. With the money from these jewels, the two of you could buy a house in the city and live there together instead of wasting money at the inn." Narcena doesn't understand what she means, so Amarst clarifies, "I mean the two of you could buy a house and live there together. Just the two of you. A home built on love and all that." Narcena's eyes immediately light up, while Lost places his hand in front of her face and says, "Yeah, like the house that the party Ansel al-Bark used to rent. They all lived there together, and we were forced to sleep in a room that felt like an oven." Amarst replies, "That's enough talk about that. By the way, the latest news is that they went to confront the Hydra and nearly lost their lives." From there, we shift to the party Ansal al-Bark, where Lara is trying to heal Armia, while Maro pulls Spiria aside and speaks with her privately, insisting that Lara is useless and that Lost had been far better than her. Spiria asks, "So what do we do now?" Maro answers, "It's simple. We'll go to him and ask him to return to the party, and he'll definitely agree." Sure enough, he heads to the guild, meets Lost, and asks him to return to their party once again. Lost replies, "Thank you for the offer." Maro assumes that Lost is considering coming back, but Narcena immediately cuts in and says, "Are you insane? Lost is in a party with me now, and he's never going back to you." Maro responds, "Then why don't we ask him directly?" Lost says, "Just because I thanked you doesn't mean I'm coming back. I'm already in a party, and I'm very happy where I am." Enraged, Maro attempts to strike Narcena, but Lost catches his hand and says, "If you come anywhere near her, I won't forgive you." Maro backs away, then begins shouting inside the guild like a madman, announcing that he wants a powerful warrior to join his party. Everyone in the guild watches him in silence. Suddenly, A massive fighter wearing a mask and carrying a gigantic sword enters and says, "I am ready to join your party." Maro says, "Then we'll conduct a test." Amarst objects, saying, "That is not allowed inside the guild." Maro replies, "Don't worry, it's just a simple test." The confrontation begins, and with a single strike, Maro's sword is knocked out of his hand, leaving everyone stunned. Maro tries to justify himself by saying he was holding back, then approaches the fighter and gets to know him, learning that his name is Sheik. Spiria says, "How can you trust someone who won't show his face?" Maro replies, "I don't trust him, I trust his sword, and if we don't do this, the party's reputation will be damaged." We leave them behind and move to the inn where Lost is staying. A girl from the inn staff comes to tell him that there are guests asking for him. Lost and Narsena come downstairs to welcome the guests, only to find that the visitors are Armia and Lara. Armia begins apologizing for the past and asks for help in facing the Hydra. Lost says, "And what if I refuse?" Lara explains that they went through a difficult time and couldn't defeat the Hydra the way he had done before. Lost says, "So you want me to join your party?" Armia replies, "Yes, if you join us, we'll be able to defeat the Hydra easily." Lost answers, "I told Maro yesterday that I will never join you again." Narsena cuts in and says, "What makes you so attached to this party in the first place?" Armia says, "Maro is arrogant, fanatical, and cruel, but they are my party members. And I did that to Lost before because I was afraid of being kicked out like him." Narsena replies, "So you're saying he wasn't your party member the way they were?" Armia begins to cry and says, "No, I'm only here to apologize for the past." Lara adds that Armia has not stopped talking about wanting to apologize all this time. Lost calms her down and places his hand on her head. Armia asks him, "Does that mean you'll join us?" He replies, "I gave Maro my answer yesterday." Armia says, completely exhausted, "I'm so tired, and I haven't eaten in almost a month." Lara pulls Lost aside and says to him, "I'm the new healer." Lost remembers Maro's words about the new healer being useless, so he looks at her and asks, "What made you end up in this party in the first place?" She replies, "If I had the choice to leave, I would." As for Armia, she is extremely attached to the party and afraid of leaving it. Lost begins thinking deeply about everything that's happening. Lara returns to the guild once again, and there she runs into Sheik. She is surprised to see him and says, "What are you doing here?" Sheik remains silent for a moment, then apologizes to her. She replies, "Forget those apologies. You were sent on a mission against your will again. You must not have come here for no reason. You even stole Arnold's sword." He answers, "No, I swear I didn't steal it. He gave it to me as a gift." Meanwhile, Maro says, "Come on, we don't have time. We have to move immediately, face the Hydra, and finish this." Then, everyone sets out toward the place where the Hydra is located. As for Lost and Narsena, they continue carrying out their missions inside the labyrinth, where they face monsters of many different shapes and types, and the result is always the same. Every monster they encounter is defeated. Lost says to Narsena, "You look tired. Let's take a break and eat something." She replies, "No, I still have energy. Let's keep going." He says, "Fine, at least let's eat first, then continue." Narsena takes out the food, and Lost is surprised by the amount. She says, "The innkeeper saw Armia completely exhausted, so she prepared this huge amount of food because she thought Armia was on our party." While they eat, Lost begins explaining the Hydra, making it clear that it is a predatory monster with powerful venom, and that any injury from it can lead to death if it is not handled quickly. Narsena asks him, "So will Armia be okay?" He says, "Don't worry. The party, Intisal al-Bark, has a strong reputation, and they have Maro with them. He's a powerful swordsman, but he only needs to get rid of his arrogance to become one of the strongest fighters in the city. Spiria is also fast and light on her feet, and she'll be useful in battle. And don't worry, there is an antidote for this poison in the guild." She replies, "But Lara said no one has that antidote." He says, "That's because it's expensive, and no one can afford to buy it." Narsena says, "It sounds like you're praising them a lot." He replies, "I'm not praising them, I'm just explaining." Then she says, "I'm tired of the labyrinth and monsters. What do you think about going to face the Hydra?" Lost freezes, surprised by her words. On the other side, the party, Intisal al-Bark, arrives at the Hydra's location, and the battle begins well. Sheik succeeds in fighting and breaking through the Hydra's defenses, but he pulls back before delivering the finishing blow. Maro asks him, "What stopped you?" Sheik replies, "I didn't want to take the credit for myself. I wanted you to be the one to kill it, so people in the city would say that Maro was the one who defeated the Hydra." Maro gets fired up and says, "You're right." Then he charges straight toward the Hydra. Lara is surprised by how close he gets. So Spiria says, "Don't worry. He's always like that. He doesn't like fighting from a distance." Armia does her part and fires her spells at the Hydra, but the Hydra immediately notices her. hurls her away and knocks her to the ground. Then it begins absorbing her mana, growing terrifyingly stronger and larger with every passing moment. As everyone watches in disbelief, Lara says, "I've read about this kind of evolution in books, but this is the first time I've ever seen it in real life." Sheik says, "Just take care of Armia. I'll handle things here." He asks Maro to retreat, but Maro refuses, saying, "No way. We've come too far to turn back now." He charges toward the Hydra once again, but just before he can deliver the finishing blow, his sword breaks. The Hydra prepares to attack him and release its deadly venom, and at that very moment, Lost appears and protects him. Sheik says, "Since you're a healer, go check on Armia and leave this to us." But when Lost reaches her, he finds that the Hydra has poisoned Lara, and her condition no longer allows her to be treated or saved. Lost continues stacking spells, hoping Lara will regain consciousness. She says to him, "What are you doing? This spell stacking method is useless." But Lost was right in what he did, and they benefit from that experience. And here it becomes clear that a person should not blindly follow their emotions. Armia thanks Lost for helping them, then falls asleep. Before that quiet moment can fully settle, the Hydra's voice cuts through from behind them. Sheik asks, "Who will advance with me?" Lost replies, "It seems she still remembers me." Narsena says, "Then let's go together." Lost responds, "At this rate, I won't be able to stop you, but be careful. This fight is dangerous." Sheik looks toward the party. Ansel Albark and says, "This has nothing to do with you." Spiria replies, "I'm out of this fight." Maro says, "As you know, my sword is broken." Sheik replies, "Then stay in the back. Your presence is unnecessary." Narsena moves forward to distract the Hydra, while Lost attacks from behind and strikes it with his knife. As for Sheik, he uses his enormous sword and manages to sever the Hydra's head. Maro stands there in shock and says, "Why didn't your sword break?" Lara says, "You're mistaken. It's a magical sword." At that very moment, the Hydra attacks Narsena and takes her hostage, demanding to face Lost alone. Lara says, "It looks like we're in serious trouble. The Hydra has evolved and become capable of issuing commands. This is going to lead to massive casualties." Lost says, "No one move. Watch out for yourselves." Then he steps forward alone to confront it, but to no avail. The Hydra knocks him to the ground. But then, a shocking twist unfolds with the appearance of the priest who had been accompanying Hans. He is writing something, as if the events themselves are being rewritten. At that moment, Lost rises to his feet once again, but this time, he is no longer the same. He transforms into a far more powerful form, resembling a ghost or a terrifying monstrous being. Everyone is stunned by his new appearance. He grabs the Hydra and destroys it in a single instant before collapsing unconscious. He awakens to the sound of Narsena's voice, desperately worried about him, and the very first thing he asks about is Armia. Lara says, "She's fine, but she's still asleep." Maro says, "Wake up, man. The three of us got a lot of jewels." Lost replies, "Three of us?" Maro says, "Me, you, and Spiria." Lost asks, "How are there only three of us?" Maro adds, "Lara and Sheik will be joining us soon, and they won't need anything. As for that girl with you, you control her, and she'll obey you." Lost asks, "What about Armia?" Maro replies, "She's unconscious and no longer useful. We'll sell her to someone who buys slaves." Narsena immediately slaps him across the face. Maro says, "What she did violates guild regulations. I'll file a report immediately." Sheik says, "I didn't see anything." Lara adds, "Neither did I." But Spiria says, "I saw everything, and I'll testify." Sheik responds, "Very well. Then we'll report you for human trafficking." Then he adds, "Since I'm from the Royal Guild, you're all coming with me to the City Guild." They are all restrained. Lara asks, "What will happen to us?" Amarst replies, "You'll be expelled from the guild and sentenced to hard labor because of your attempt to engage in human trafficking." Then the truth is revealed. Sheik isn't his real name. He had been using an alias. In reality, he is an adventurer from the Royal Guild who was sent after the city began experiencing unrest among adventurers, who had become a threat to public safety. Lost asks to speak with him privately and requests that Maro and Spiria be forgiven. Sheik replies, "Are you insane?" Lost says, "Just hear me out. They're only young adventurers. Fame and money got to their heads, but they deserve another chance to start over." Zeke then orders all members of the guild to evacuate the city completely, abandon it, and stay away from it permanently, warning them, anyone seen inside the city will be killed. Lara asks, "Are you really convinced this is the right decision?" Zeke replies, "This decision will allow me to get closer to adventurers and learn much more about them." She responds, "But this type of strategy is usually carried out in a major city, not a place like this. He says, I know exactly what I'm doing. She asks him directly, are you saying the corruption originates from the administration itself rather than the adventurers? He answers, exactly. That's why we need to register ourselves with the guild as a party. What do you think? Lara agrees, but on one condition. Armia must also be part of the party. He replies, that's fine. Having a diverse group of members will definitely benefit us. Then he adds, ever since I arrived, I've been trying to learn every little detail about everyone, and there are still many things I don't know about certain people here. By that, he is clearly referring to Lost. The scene then shifts as the group gathers to officially announce the formation of their party in front of Lost and Narcena. Narcena says, your party really is strong, a warrior, a mage, and a healer. I can't help but envy you. Lost turns to Armia and asks, are you satisfied with this new situation? She replies, I don't have anything else, so I have no choice but to adapt. Lost and Narcena walk through the city and she asks him, where are we going? He replies, to the guild. She says in surprise, at this early hour? He responds, we're going to sell some of the jewels we got from the Hydra yesterday. Besides, don't you want to take on bigger quests? She replies, of course. I'm with you in anything difficult like that. They enter the guild, and immediately everyone's eyes turn toward them. Narcena finds it strange. Lost warns her, be careful. She asks, careful of what? He says, we're carrying valuable jewels. Someone might try to steal them. Unexpectedly, however, a warrior named Barlen approaches them alongside his party and asks to speak with Lost in private. Lost becomes suspicious, thinking it could be a trap to steal the jewels. Barlen's party steps away, and Barlen begins apologizing, saying, we knew from the very beginning that Maro was wrong to treat you the way he did, but we never warned you or stopped him. Instead, we talked badly about you and called you a fool. Lost replies, that doesn't matter to me. Barlen says, then tell me what would satisfy you, and I'll do it. Narcena becomes angry and says, you and your party should kneel for 3 days and 3 nights. Barlen says in shock, what are you talking about? She replies, that's the very least you deserve. But Lost stops her, saying, calm down. If they actually do that, people will only hate me even more. Then he turns to Barlen and says, I'm not angry with you. Say whatever you want about me. You mean nothing to me. After that, Lost leaves and heads over to hand the jewels to Amarst. She says in surprise, these are high-quality evolved jewels. Narcena asks, does that mean they're worth less? Amarst replies, on the contrary, their value has increased tenfold because of the Hydra's evolution. Lost asks, what exactly does this evolution mean? I see monsters evolving by absorbing adventurers' mana, while others move through the upper floors of the labyrinth. So where does the guild stand in all of this? Amarst replies, it has nothing to do with us. We only receive reports. The administration is the one that takes action. Before the conversation can continue, Hans enters alongside Amarst and says, there's a small matter that requires your attention. Hans takes Lost and Narcena to his office, where Lost begins explaining the dangerous developments and behaviors displayed by the monsters. But Hans responds coldly, questioning what the problem is in the first place. Lost objects, insisting that it is their responsibility to warn adventurers about such dangers so that no one gets hurt. However, Hans replies that the guild has no concern for such trivial matters, and if Lost doesn't like the situation, he can leave the city altogether. The three leave the office, and Narcena is absolutely furious at Hans's attitude, while Rest tries to calm her down, saying that this is simply the way he is. Then Rest asks them whether they know the guild leader. Lost replies that he does, and that his name is Mist. Rest explains that the man is so old that he can no longer move, which is why he entrusted the management of affairs to Hans, who controls the guild's operations from behind the scenes. Lost is astonished by the extent of Hans's influence. Rest explains that it isn't really about power as much as it is about his tendency to ignore everything he considers unimportant, and that's precisely why most adventurers fear him. Lost refuses to prolong the conversation and asks for a suitable quest. Rest leads them to several quests, but they all turn out to be trivial until they come across one involving the Phoenix Bird. Rest explains that this monster possesses overwhelming power and usually cannot be confronted by a single individual. Instead, it requires a high-level warrior, mage, and healer working together. The three exchange glances, realizing that this description fits them perfectly. They decide to accept the quest. Afterward, they head to Zeke, Lara, and Armia to present the idea to them. Lara whispers to Zeke that if they agree, she will be able to observe Lost from up close, and he immediately approves. As for Armia, she accepts out of her desire to atone for her previous mistake when she testified against Lost in the past. Lost decides that they will set out the following morning, but first they will head down to buy supplies. The team walks through the city streets, and Narcina feels that Lost is putting in a great deal of effort for her sake. However, she is suddenly startled when someone grabs her from behind. She reacts instantly and attacks, only to discover that it is Ralma. Angrily, she demands to know why Ralma is there. Ralma responds with surprise at the way she was greeted, and then Lost appears as well, shocked by her presence, for she is his former mentor. Everyone heads to a nearby restaurant, where Narcina explains that Ralma is a friend of her father, and that she came to take her back home. However, Ralma replies that the matter concerns family affairs. Lost responds by saying that Narcina is now a member of his party, which means she is under his care, and he will not allow anyone to take her away if she does not wish to return. The tension rises, and Ralma launches a fiery attack, but Lost dodges it with ease, causing her to notice just how much he has grown compared to the past. She asks him to sit down calmly and listen. Then she questions Narcina about leaving home without permission, and Narcina replies that she left a letter telling them that she was with her big brother, Lost. Ralma objects to that explanation and asks why she left in the first place, while Narcina struggles to provide a clear answer, as her feelings toward Lost are tied to him in a way she cannot easily explain. Lost steps in, insisting that such a decision should be made with her father's approval, and Narcina responds with obvious uncertainty. Ralma reassures Narcina that she will handle the matter with her father, and confirms that their intentions are not bad, as long as Narcina appears comfortable with the party. She then suggests celebrating the situation and orders lemon juice. In a private moment, Ralma jokingly warns Narcina not to become overly attached to Lost, while Narcina confidently replies that Lost is someone worthy of trust, and that she is willing to do anything for him because he is no longer merely a leader to her. He has become a true source of support in her life. In the end, Ralma comments that Lost has changed tremendously since the past, and that he had been far less mature when she was his teacher. She asks Narcina to remain by his side for as long as possible. Lost returns carrying Narcina, and together they head toward the rest of the party to begin their new mission. Meanwhile, Ralma moves with a sharp expression and intentions that do not seem good at all, heading directly to the guild. There, she encounters Amarst, who stops her and asks whether she has an appointment with the guild leader or some personal connection that grants her permission to meet him. Ralma replies that she does not need any special status to see him, and tells Amarst to step aside so she can handle things in her own way. Ralma attempts to push past and prepares to use a fire spell to force her way through, but Hans quickly intervenes and grabs hold of her, asking her to calm down. He then quietly asks what she truly wants so that he can personally deliver the message to the guild leader. She agrees and explains her concerns, pointing out that the city situation is worsening. Rebellious adventurers have appeared, and the monsters have begun undergoing unnatural transformations that could threaten everyone. Hans responds coldly, saying that he receives these complaints all the time, and that an adventurer had come to him with the same concerns the previous day. When asked how he responded, he simply told him that if he disliked the situation, he should leave the city. Ralma becomes furious at this answer, considering it a dismissal of those trying to improve things, while Hans replies that they cannot manage affairs based on possibilities and emotions. The argument grows more intense, and Ralma suggests that this attitude could lead to disastrous consequences, such as a rebellion within the labyrinth or the collapse of public order. Hans coldly responds that anyone who dislikes the situation is free to leave the city as well. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to Lost and his party inside the labyrinth, where an unnatural silence fills the air. Lost explains that the phoenix bird prefers wide, quiet places and will only reveal itself if it senses their presence. He picks up a stone and throws it to create noise, successfully drawing it out. The phoenix bird appears immediately, and the moment it emerges, it unleashes a barrage of dense fireballs toward them. Everyone takes cover behind the walls. Lara warns that if this continues, the entire area will be destroyed. While Narcina wonders whether the bird is supposed to sense their presence and attack them directly, Lost explains that if they had been fewer in number, it would not have confronted them, but it fears the combined strength of the entire party. Lost proposes a plan and asks Armia whether she can create water spheres. She confirms that she can. He asks her to keep the bird occupied from a distance and target its wings to weaken it, while he draws its attention himself. Narcina reassures him that she will participate in the battle as well. The party rushes into combat, and Armia begins launching her water spells. She succeeds in calming the bird slightly and forcing it to descend. Zeke seizes the opportunity and strikes it with his sword, but the attack has no effect. Instead, it produces an unexpected result. The phoenix bird transforms from its fiery form into an even more powerful water form. Everyone is left stunned, and Lara realizes that what is happening is an unprecedented evolution. Armia becomes extremely anxious, fearing that she will lose her role within the party just as she had before with other monsters, while Lara tries to comfort her. At that very moment, the phoenix bird prepares a fatal attack aimed directly at Armia, while Lara attempts to pull her away before the strike lands on them. At the crucial moment, Zeke blocks the attack with his sword and says to her, "I swore that no one would hurt you as long as I'm here. Get up quickly. If we stay like this, we'll all die." Lara tries to help her stand, but Armia has already regained both her composure and confidence. She says, "No, I can get up on my own. Just give me some time and I'll give you the very best I have." The party spirits rise, and Narcena charges toward the monster and attacks it, but her strikes are too weak to leave any real impact. Armia continues activating the most powerful spell in her arsenal, and after a few moments, she completes the incantation. An icy sword appears in her hand. She leaps into the air and strikes the monster, landing powerfully on its head while clinging to it as they crash toward the ground, calling out to Lost. At that very instant, Lost rushes forward and drives his knife into the phoenix bird's head, bringing the battle to a complete end. Armia stands there in shock while Lara says to her, "Be happy. We did it. It's over." Each member of the party begins offering her words of encouragement, assuring her that the victory was thanks to her efforts, and at last, tears stream down her face. Lost says, "Grab the jewels. Let's leave." Meanwhile, both Lara and Zeke notice that Lost did not transform this time the way he had before, which only deepens their astonishment. The party returns to the inn, where they find Ralma waiting for them. Lost asks her, "What brought you here?" She replies, "Your friend from the guild gave me some money and told me that you had gone to face the phoenix. Since you've returned, that means you won." They sit down with her, and she drinks large amounts of lemon juice while occasionally speaking in a somewhat incoherent manner. Then she informs them that Narcena is the rightful heir to the Earl. Everyone was stunned by the news, and even Lost found himself revisiting his memories, wondering whether Narcena was the very girl he had met in the past. The conversation then shifted to Hans, as they learned that another transformation had occurred within the labyrinth. They also confirmed that Ralma, the fire mage, had personally come to monitor the city's situation. Afterward, Lost and Narcena went to sell the phoenix jewels, while Amarst handed them a small pouch. Narcena protested, saying, "Aren't these monsters dangerous and extremely profitable? Where's the money you told us about? Are you stealing from us?" Amarst replied, "Open the pouch first, then judge." When she opened it, she found it overflowing with gold coins. Lost immediately said, "Close it quickly before anyone sees it." Then he left her behind and walked away, while Amarst asked whether the two of them had gotten into a fight. After that, Narcena caught up with Lost, and they had lunch together in the middle of the city. She said to him, "What do you think about buying a house with this money instead of staying at the inn? We could buy any house we want." Deep down, she wanted to grow closer to him and live together under the same roof. However, Lost replied, "Not now. We're not a complete party yet. Zeke and Lara only fought alongside us temporarily during the Phoenix battle, and we still haven't answered Zeke's proposal about merging our two parties." Narcena asked, "Do you really want them to join our party?" He answered, "Based on what I saw during the battle, Zeke is incredibly strong, and his sword is exceptional. I don't mind him joining us at all. In fact, he might help us delve even deeper into the labyrinth." Narcena smiled and said, "All right, do whatever you think is best. I'll support you no matter what." After that, Lost returned with her to the rest of the group at the inn, and they celebrated the union of the two parties. The innkeeper prepared a luxurious dinner for everyone. Everyone enjoyed the meal, but before long, Armia became sleepy. Lara said she would take her upstairs to her room. At that moment, Lara whispered into Zeke's ear, "Get closer to Lost now." Narcena soon followed Lara as well and admitted that she needed advice. She confessed that she had nearly revealed her feelings to Lost when she suggested they live together, but he had rejected the idea. Lara replied, "I never expected your heart to be this strong." Meanwhile, Zeke sat down with Lost and tried to understand how he truly felt about Narcena. Lost told him that Narcena wanted to buy a house for the party, but he had refused. Zeke asked, "Do you hate her?" Lost immediately became flustered and replied, "Hate her? How could I hate the girl who gave me a new reason to live? The girl who came to the guild specifically because of me?" Zeke said, "I think I asked the wrong question." Then, "Do you love Narcena?" Lost hesitated before answering, "I don't know, but there's something I need to confirm first." At that moment, Amarst entered carrying several documents in her hands. However, Before learning what they contained, the scene shifted to the girls. The girls were chatting together when Lara finally opened up to Narcina, admitting that she might have feelings for Zeke. Surprised, Narcina asked how that had happened. Lara began her story. In the past, back in our hometown, we were part of the same party. One day, a new warrior arrived and asked to join us, and Zeke agreed, but that man wasn't a good person. He constantly tried to get close to me, and one day, he even attacked me. I didn't stay silent. I broke his arm and tied him up until Zeke arrived and stopped him. Afterward, Zeke drove him out of the city. Even then, he never stopped pursuing me. That's why he's been running away from me ever since. The scene returned to the men, where Amarst began explaining the documents she carried. She revealed that Narcina was the rightful heir of Lord Earl. However, ever since childhood, she had never wanted that role. She had always dreamed of becoming an adventurer instead. Unfortunately, such a dream conflicted with her country's traditions, and because of that, her parents repeatedly rejected her wishes. Then the greatest surprise of all occurred. One day, Narcina woke up and discovered that her hair color had changed from yellow to blue. From that moment onward, her father agreed to let her become an adventurer and live however she wished. He told her that he would never stand in her way again. To better understand why, the story shifted to the old man in the city who entertained children with puppets while telling them the tale of a brave hero who had once faced a mighty dragon. The hero fought courageously, but the dragon was overwhelmingly powerful and nearly killed him. Then a mysterious girl appeared, possessing an unknown power that no one understood. She was known as the Sleeping Princess. She stood against the dragon, and everyone was astonished by her blue hair. The scene returned to Lost and Zeke. Zeke asked, "Did you want to make sure Narcina's father truly approved of her being here?" Lost replied, "Yes, and now I've confirmed it." Meanwhile, the girls continued talking until Armia woke up and joined them. Together, they encouraged Lara to confess her feelings to Zeke. Eventually, they all went downstairs to where the others were gathered, and Lara asked Zeke if they could speak privately. She told him that she wasn't angry about what had happened in the past anymore, and that she wanted to leave it behind. More than that, she wanted to become his partner. Zeke replied, "We're already on the same team. What more could you possibly want?" She answered, "No, I mean partners in life." Zeke fell silent for a moment. Then she added, "Don't misunderstand me. I simply wanted to express how I truly feel. This is my way of taking a step forward." Meanwhile, the rest of the group had been eavesdropping on their conversation, but Lost interrupted the atmosphere by asking Narcina if she would have lunch with him the following day, because there was something important he wanted to discuss with her. Narcina's eyes immediately sparkled, and she convinced herself that perhaps he was finally going to confess his feelings to her. That night passed, but Narcina couldn't sleep from overthinking. The next morning, a group of adventurers set out on a mission, only to find themselves overwhelmed by an enormous number of monsters. They completely lost control of the situation. In fact, one of them threw a child named Kiss toward the monster, so that he himself could escape. At the same time, Lost and his party were still at the restaurant and had yet to leave. Narcina remained lost in thought. Zeke said to Lost, "Go talk to her now. The girl's not even here with us mentally." Lost walked over to her. But before he could say anything, Kiss stumbled into the restaurant in terrible condition, exhausted and barely conscious. Lost immediately rushed over to him and carried him to a room to treat his injuries. After he came back out, Narcina asked about the child's condition. Lost apologized for not finishing their conversation and reassured her that Lara and Armia were taking care of him. At that moment, the innkeeper entered and explained that Kiss was Sheila's childhood friend. He had grown up in an orphanage, and his lifelong dream had been to become an adventurer. That dream had finally come true when he joined the guild. Lost then said to Narcina, "We'll finish our conversation later, but right now, there's something important I have to do." He headed to the guild, where he discovered that Marlin and his men had subdued Kiss's party and tied them up. Elsewhere, Marlin said to him, "Don't worry, Lost. You've got men standing behind you. That coward confessed to everything. So what do you say? Shall we cut them down however you like?" Lost replied, "No, we'll let them leave the city." Marlin untied them and declared, "You've been granted a second chance at life thanks to Lost. Get out of here, and if I ever lay eyes on any of you again, I'll kill you on the spot." At that moment, Amar stepped forward and said, "Carrying out orders like these isn't the duty of adventurers." Marlin replied, "No, it's the guild's duty. The guild's responsibility is to put an end to adventurers who prey on the weak and abuse children." Amar says, "This has nothing to do with me. These are higher orders, and I'm only carrying them out." Lost asks, "Higher orders from whom?" At that moment, Hans appears and says, "Why are you asking about matters that don't concern you? And how are you issuing orders to exile adventurers when you're nothing more than an adventurer like them? These orders are supposed to apply to you as well." Everyone standing there begins pressuring Hans, wanting to attack him, but Marlin says to them, violence won't solve anything. Lost says, I'll go speak with him privately. The two enter the office and Lost says, is there no solution for the rebellious adventurers? Why are you letting them spread corruption throughout the city? Every guild in other cities takes firm action against those who do wrong, so why don't you do that here? Hans calmly replies, I've told you before, if you don't like the situation, leave the city and go somewhere that suits you. But driving adventurers out of the city is not your right. You're misunderstanding things, Lost. We didn't force anyone to become an adventurer. The child chose that path himself. Lost replies, you're not wrong when it comes to the freedom to choose, but you are wrong because you haven't taken a stand against the adventurers who harm the weak. Hans says, adventurers always support one another. The weak among them are the ones who die, while only the strong deserve to live. Then he says, it seems you've completely forgotten me, Lost. He reveals his arm, showing an old scar. At that moment, Lost recalls the past, back when he first began his life as an adventurer and went on a mission with a group of adventurers to fight goblins. With them was a child named Nogism, and this was the very first mission of his life. The adventurers mocked Nogism and forced him to carry all the bags, while Lost tried to help him. But Nogism kept to himself and said to him, no one asked for your help except you. So Lost left him alone, carried the rest of the bags, and moved on. Night fell while they were in the forest, and the entire group went to sleep. The only one left awake was Nogism, who was supposed to keep watch, but he dozed off. Lost came to him and said, wake up, a group of goblins is coming. The adventurers didn't believe him and asked Lost how many there were. He said, I don't know, there are many of them, more than I can count. When the goblins appeared, the adventurers began using Nogism as bait and then fled, but Lost did not abandon him. He went down with him because Nogism was young and did not understand what was happening. Lost said to him, we've become the bait now, so the rest of the adventurers can escape. Nogism became furious, so Lost said to him, good, since you're angry, we'll defend ourselves. Each of them drew his sword and faced the goblins. The goblins managed to hide from them, and Nogism said, they ran away. We're safe now. But Lost said, who said they ran away? They won't be able to leave the forest. Goblins, Nogism, when they face two groups, attack the larger group to cause the greatest possible damage. Suddenly, they heard the sounds of battle, as the goblins were attacking the rest of the adventurers. Nogism said, this is our chance to escape. Lost said, I wish we could help them. Nogism replied, are you insane? Those people wanted to kill us. Suddenly, Lost noticed a wound on Nogism's arm, so he immediately began healing it without hesitation. Nogism said, what are you doing? Run and save yourself. But Lost did not listen and continued the treatment. Nogism said, only those who deserve to live survive in this world, and the weak must die. Lost replied, yes, the world is cruel to the weak, but there is always hope for their survival. Nogism said, I don't know where you get all this confidence from. Lost answered, because I was saved once before. We return to the present, where Hans says, you really did save me in the past, and you taught me a lesson I will never forget. But after we returned to the city, we parted ways, and each of us walked a different path. I went with the old man of the city and became his right hand. Lost says, and who is this old man you're talking about? Hans answers, Mist, the manager of the guild branch in the city. Lost says, yes, I heard you were promoted quite a lot. Congratulations, Uncle Hans. Hans replies, it seems you still don't understand. I'm not saying this so you can congratulate me. I'm saying it to repay the debt I owe you for saving me in the past. Right now, I'm trying to save you, and I'm telling you, leave the city as soon as possible. And if you love Narcina, take her with you. Lost goes back to Marlin and his team, still unable to fully comprehend what he has just been told. Meanwhile, Amarst arrives and says, I need to tell you something important. Large numbers of monsters have started appearing on the road to the city, and they may arrive soon. That is why I'm asking for your help, as well as the help of all adventurers. Lost goes to Narcina and tells her the news. From that point on, they begin training the children to fight so they will not be weak, the way Hans described them. At the same time, Hans goes to Mist while carrying a letter from the royal capital. Mist opens the letter and says, the situation appears far worse than we expected, and the Prime Minister says that the Earl's heiress must not be allowed out of our sight. Hans says, and why is the Prime Minister so concerned about the Earl's heiress? Mist answers, have you heard the story of the dragon and the sleeping princess? Hans says, everyone knows it, even children. Mist says, that story is not a myth, it is the truth. and it is the foundation for preserving the balance of this world. And the traits of the sleeping princess apply only to Narcena. We move to the group that set out to confront the monsters on the road to the city. Lara says, "We can hide somewhere and ambush them." Armia says, "I can cast a spell that will wipe them out from a distance." But Lost says, "No, we'll face them directly, but away from the city." Zeke says, "Then let's take the other road." And indeed, they head there, where they see the carriage near which Narcena had been attacked in the past. But time and people have changed. Narcena charges forward with excitement and attacks the goblins, while Lost remembers his old memories, making his determination and strength grow even greater. They finish wiping them out and collect their jewels. But suddenly, they feel a powerful earthquake that reaches the city, the inn, and the guild, and concern appears on Mist's face. The group returns to the inn to check on everyone, and the innkeeper says everything is fine, only a few plates broke. But one of Marlin's men interrupts them and says they are needed immediately at the city entrance. They quickly head there, and they see a massive number of goblins approaching the city. Marlin says, "I know this isn't your duty. The guild is supposed to handle it, but I'm asking for your help." Lost says, "We are children of the same city, and we won't hesitate to help it." Everyone charges into battle, each in their own way. Narcena with her sword, Zeke with his sword, Armia with her spells, and Lost at the heart of the battlefield. Suddenly, Lost cuts off one of the goblin's arms, but the severed arm begins speaking, saying, "All humans will die, no one will remain." Everyone freezes in shock, unable to believe that the goblins can speak. Lost says, "We need to eliminate them quickly to protect the city." After they defeat them, they collect the jewels, but Lost says, "It's impossible for goblins to speak the human language, even if they're undergoing transformations." Suddenly, an adventurer comes running and shouting, "The labyrinth has started spawning enormous numbers of goblins, and they're heading toward the city right now." Narcena says, "What are we going to do now?" Lost said to her, "Just as you suggested earlier, we'll go into the city, gather all the adventurers, and confront the monsters." When they returned to the guild, they found it packed with people and filled with loud commotion. Amarist informed them that the guild had announced an enormous reward for anyone who could eliminate those monsters. The moment Narcena saw the amount of the prize, she exclaimed, "This is far greater than all the money we've been earning." Lost replied, "Hans is definitely the one who put up this reward." Zeke asked, "Do you think Hans knows exactly how many monsters there are?" Lost answered, "The fact that he did this means he's been planning for this for a very long time." Before they could continue their discussion, Ralma interrupted them. Everyone was surprised to see her, and she said, "Won't you welcome me even once?" Lost said, "The number of monsters keeps increasing, and they've already begun attacking the city. The only explanation for this is the possibility of a rebellion within the labyrinth." No one understood what he meant, but Amarist said, "Yes, I've heard about something like this before." She immediately took them to the library to review historical records. There, she explained that a labyrinth rebellion occurs when magical energy inside the labyrinth rises to an enormous level, causing massive numbers of monsters to emerge. To eliminate this excess energy, all of the monsters must be exterminated until the labyrinth calms down and begins producing new monsters once again. Ralma added, "A labyrinth rebellion hasn't occurred in over 100 years, but 100 years is a short period for the Royal Guild, isn't it, Zeke?" Lost said, "Forget the history books for now. We need to move immediately. We have a large number of adventurers, so let's prepare for battle." And so, everyone went out to prepare the city, constructing defensive barricades to withstand the monsters. Narcena asked Lost, "Do you think these barriers will be enough?" Lost replied, "We're simply doing what we have to do." Before they could continue, Kiss interrupted them. The children with him wanted to participate in the fighting, but Marlin had stopped them earlier and convinced them to prepare food and distribute it to the adventurers instead. Lost said, "Well done. You're good at persuading people." Marlin replied, "We were their age once." That very moment, the goblins began attacking the city, and the adventurers engaged them in battle. But it wasn't just goblins anymore. Mid-level monsters also appeared. Lich monsters emerged in the skies above the city, ordering the goblins to kill. Zeke was shocked by what he saw, while Ralma unleashed her fire magic and destroyed the liches. Then she said, "More are coming." Narcena asked for help, but Ralma replied, "I'm exhausted. Handle it yourselves. Zeke said, I'll take care of it. Lost added, I'm with you. All of them rushed into the battlefield. Zeke was cutting down goblins when suddenly a magical sword appeared and wiped them out with a single strike. Then a man appeared and said, I thought you'd use that sword better than that, Zeke. Zeke stared in surprise and said, Arnold. The man continued, Lost and Narcina are here too. Zeke asked, You know them? Narcina replied, Yes, I've trained with him many times. Arnold said, Lost is my student as well. Rama then approached and greeted him in her own way by launching a fire attack at him. He blocked it and said, I'd love to talk more, but I have work to do. He then used his sword and wiped out all the goblins throughout the city. Rama explained, Arnold is an incredible swordsman. We used to go on missions together and Lost would accompany us too. Suddenly, a magical gate opened and Hans appeared. He asked Ralma, Lost and Narcina to come with him because Mist wanted to see them. They followed him. Ralma warned Lost not to do anything reckless because Mist was incredibly powerful and could eliminate them within seconds. Lost listened to her advice, but Ralma herself failed to follow it. The moment she saw Mist, she launched a fire attack at him. Lost and Narcina were stunned, while it became apparent that Mist belonged to the clan of the elves. Mist said, Is this how you greet your teacher? You nearly burned my favorite robe. Silence filled the room for a moment before the truth began to reveal itself. Ralma said, The clan of the elves lives for more than 600 years. That's why Mist is far more powerful than I am when it comes to magic. Mist replied, You have no manners when speaking to your teacher. Ralma answered, You've grown old. Time has caught up with you. Hans said, Do something about her. Mist sighed and said, My boy, look at how they speak to their teachers. Anyway, sit down. We have something important to discuss. Ralma explained. He knew from the very beginning everything that would happen. That's why he increased the number of adventurers affiliated with the guild until they outnumbered the actual adventurers living in the city. This created a massive conflict between the adventurers and the city's residents. In short, he knew that a rebellion within the labyrinth was inevitable. Lost asked her, Are you sure you really saw signs of the rebellion? She replied, Those signs were as clear as daylight. Monsters were appearing on floors far above their usual levels, and their behavior had changed in unnatural ways. Anyone should have noticed that. She added, At the very least, people should have been informed about the rebellion so they could prepare and take precautions. Han said, And how exactly were we supposed to tell you? Should we announce that a rebellion is coming when we don't even know when it will happen? In a day, a month, a year? Lost answered, There was no need to specify the exact day, but the people in the city should have been prepared. Ralma said, Don't waste your breath arguing with them. There's another reason behind all of this, and it's beyond our control. Mist asked, Does it have something to do with the Royal Guild? She replied, No, my boy, it's much bigger than that, but let's leave that aside for now. The rebellion has already begun. Ralma continued, Eventually, the monsters will destroy the city and then head toward the capital. However, Mist had already taken precautions. He knew that the mysterious pillars no one understood had a purpose connected to the rebellion if it ever occurred. Lost said, Since you know all of this, how about we make a deal? The city's adventurers won't hold out for much longer. How about protecting the city with your magical power? She asked. Do you mean that if I agree to your proposal, I'll save the city? Hans replied, Of course. We'll descend into the labyrinth and eliminate its master. Narcina said, But no one knows where the labyrinth's master is. Hans answered, We have information that will lead us to him. Once we defeat him, the rebellion will end. Ralma said, Then it's settled. She took the younger group and headed to the nearest pillar. Entering it, she created a network that spread across the entire city. The city's residents were astonished by the barrier and by the identity of the person who had created it. At that moment, Lost and Narcina arrived and informed everyone that Ralma had made an agreement with Mist to protect the city until the Labyrinth Master was defeated. Arnold said, This is the worst decision she's ever made. Her life is now in constant danger. The more monsters attack the barrier, the more Ralma's magical energy will be depleted, and if she loses consciousness, she could die. Suddenly, a giant eagle attacked the city, but it crashed into the barrier, which stopped its assault. Arnold said, That's one of the griffin monsters. The eagle desperately tried to tear the barrier apart. Arnold added, The danger surrounding Ralma is growing. Lost stepped forward and said, I'm the one who caused all of this, so I have to take responsibility. Arnold replied, If you're going to face this danger, then I'm going with you. Narcina looked at them and asked, Are you two going alone? Narcina says, I'm coming with you. The entire party sets out to face the monsters before they can destroy the barrier network. The battle against the goblins begins, and things are going well until they start retreating. Suddenly, a giant wolf appears. Lost is shocked and says, "Is that Werner?" Zeke says, "An eagle and a wolf at the same time? What kind of terrible day is this?" Arnold says, "Face the wolf. I'll handle the eagle." Lost replies, "As you wish." Armia asks, "What did the wolf say?" Zeke says, "We've become its enemies now." The wolf charges in to attack, and Lost stands against it, but it is incredibly fast and manages to wound his arm. Zeke tries to defend him, while Lara runs toward him and says, "Are you okay?" Lost says, "I'm fine. Don't worry." Armia begins casting her spell from the rear, but the wolf summons other monsters, and a lich-type creature appears and strikes Armia. Narcina rushes to save her. The wolf attacks everyone and knocks Lost to the ground. Narcina's emotions explode, and she attacks it with all her strength, but it rises again and wounds her arm. Just as she is about to fall, she says to it, "You wounded me, but you haven't won the battle yet." Suddenly, Lost appears and drives his knife into the center of its head, finishing it off. It then becomes clear that Narcina had confronted the wolf to give Lost enough time to recover his strength while he was healing himself. She loses consciousness, and when she opens her eyes, she finds herself inside the city. She says, "Is it possible that I'm still alive? And Arnold is alive too? What did you do about the eagle?" Arnold replies, "The mission was a success, sweetheart. And this is its jewel too." Narcina says, "Thank God. We saved Ralma and all made it out of that fight safely." Suddenly, Hans emerges from another magical gate and says to her, "You survived so that you could come with me." Then he takes her away right in front of them, and the gate closes as everyone standing there is left in shock. Day after day, they sit together, planning what they will do next. Then Arnold begins telling them more about the sleeping princess, and Narcina learns the details of the story. Armia asks, "Isn't that story just a myth?" Arnold replies, "Many parts of it are not true. But the truth is that the dragon must devour the princess in order for its rage to calm." Then he begins explaining more in detail. On the other side, Hans has already brought Narcina to Mist. Narcina tries to hit him, but he pushes her away and says, "Calm down and let's try to talk." She asks, "What are you going to do to me?" Mist replies, "That depends on the circumstances." Then he says to her, "By the way, have you heard of the evil dragon?" She says, "You're mocking me." Mist replies, "On the contrary, I want you to describe it to me." Narcina says, "It's a different kind of monster that appears every 200 years. Mist says, "Not necessarily every 200 years. It has also appeared after 400 years and after 600 years. Each time it appeared, a hero stood against it and exhausted all of its power. But this time, that hero does not exist." Meanwhile, Arnold is telling the young group the same story, saying, "The absence of the hero means there must be a substitute. That substitute is the sleeping princess, whom the dragon will devour, and then the rebellion will end." Lost says, "You mean Narcina?" Narcina herself is shocked by what she hears. Mist says, "All the traits apply to her, and your blue hair is the greatest proof." Narcina asks, "My father knows about this?" He replies, "Yes, he knows, even though it is unusual for the sleeping princess to come from the Earl clan." At that moment, Narcina thinks to herself, "So that's why he didn't want me to come here." Lost, on the other hand, is unable to process what he is hearing and says, "So Mist is going to use Narcina as bait?" Arnold says, "No one knows his intentions except him, but I don't think that's his plan. It may be the plan of someone above him, like the Chancellor." Armia asks, "Then what about Ralma and Narcina?" Lost says, "He's acting on the idea that the death of one person is better than the death of the entire city." Then Mist continues speaking, saying, "If the rebellion is completed and the monsters destroy the city, the Chancellor will appear, kill everyone, and take control of the world. That is why we must move immediately toward the Labyrinth Master." On Arnold and the young group's side, Zeke says, "Does the guild know all this and still hasn't warned the city's residents?" Arnold replies, "These are the Chancellor's plans, and not everyone in the guild agrees with them." Armia asks, "Then what about Ralma and Narcina?" Arnold says, "Ralma is bound by an agreement, while Narcina has been taken. He plans to go down into the labyrinth, and if he fails to defeat its master, he will offer Narcina to the dragon so it calms down." Lara says, "All of this is just speculation." Arnold replies, "We have no choice but to go to the labyrinth and face the master there." Zeke says, "But we don't know anything about it." Arnold says, "We won't need to know. We'll go to the deepest point, and it will be there." Then he says, "What do you think, Lost?" Lost replies, "There is no other choice." Zeke says, "I'm with you through thick and thin." Arnold says, "Then let's eat quickly and move out." At that time, Hans has used Narcina inside a magical teleportation circle, and the two of them have moved to the lowest point of the labyrinth. There, Narcina sees monsters she has never seen before, and Mist says, "These are advanced level monsters. You won't see them on the upper floors of the labyrinth, As for the Labyrinth Master, it is over there by the temple. At the same time, the young group finishes their meal and descends into the labyrinth, only to find the place completely empty. Arnold says, "We're lucky. Let's hurry to the teleportation circle before the second wave of monsters appears." They enter the circle and are transported to the same location where Mist and Narcina are. When Lost sees her, he calls out to her and runs toward her. Arnold tries to stop him because of the high-level monsters nearby, but Lost has already made his decision and begins fighting them, wiping them out one after another. He finally reaches Narcina, and Mist says, "I knew you would come." Then he says, "Take your beloved. Since you've made it this far, that's good. Finish the Labyrinth Master yourselves." Lost says to him, "By doing this, you're breaking the promise you made to the darkness." Mist replies, "My boy, I have grown old, and I only have a short time left before death. As for you, the truth is still right before your eyes, and you must learn to rely on yourselves. Come on, let us move deeper." They head toward the temple, and Mist says to them, "At the very least, try to kill the Labyrinth Master so the dragon will calm down for another 200 years. Arnold asks, "So if we kill it, the monster rebellion will stop?" Lost asks, "And what if we kill the dragon itself?" Mist replies, "The dragon itself, if it loses its magical energy, will search for any other body to possess. Once it takes over a new body, it will use it for its own purpose. But if you can kill that body, then you will gain something priceless. You will gain time, and you will live your lives in peace." Mist then strikes the ground, and the Labyrinth Master appears before them. It is a siren-class monster. Each member of the party begins fulfilling their role. Armia uses a spell to restrain it, while Zeke and Arnold cut off its wings. Narcina delivers a decisive strike to its head, and in the end, Lost shatters its jewel. They think they have finished it off, but the ground begins shaking beneath them, and branches emerge from below, wrapping around them from every direction. One of those branches grabs Hans, and he and two others begin speaking with Mist, saying to him, "If you want my help, then let me leave my body and control it." Hans said, "Don't do it. I'm going to die anyway. As for all of you, live in peace." Mist hesitated for a moment, but then the dragon took over his body and disappeared from the scene. Hans collapsed to the ground, and Lost rushed toward him, desperately trying to save him. Hans handed him the key to the magical gate and said, "Hurry, save the city." Lost returned to the city only to discover that Mist had created magical branches that wrapped themselves around Ralma's barrier network throughout the entire city and were crushing it with immense force, placing Ralma in real danger. Ralma had already reached the very limits of her power and apologized to Lost because she could die at any moment. At the same time, the dragon was absorbing the fear and anxiety of the people within the city, causing its magical power to grow stronger and stronger. The second wave of the rebellion was also on the verge of beginning as the number of monsters continued to rise without end. All the adventurers in the city had been waiting for Lost, but after his prolonged absence, Marlin decided to lead them into battle against the monsters himself. Meanwhile, Lost was still trying to save Hans. Arnold said, "We have to hurry. Ralma won't be able to hold out much longer." Lost continued his efforts until Hans finally regained consciousness. Grabbing Lost's hand, Hans asked him to leave him behind and go save the city. He also begged him to be merciful toward Mist because Mist was not evil as people believed. Children like them had been orphans with no one to care for them, and Mist was the one who had taught Hans everything he knew. That was why he asked Lost to forgive him. Hans added that Mist had hesitated inside the temple because he never wanted to kill him, and he had always stood against the Chancellor whenever he demanded the destruction of the city. Lost replied, "I never hated him. I respected him and considered him a close friend." Hans smiled faintly and said, "I felt the same way about you. That's why I asked you to leave the city and not get involved." Narcina then said, "Then you were selfish. You knew everything that was happening, yet you didn't tell your friend or even the adventurers, all because you wanted to protect them." Then she added, "Treat him. Someone like him shouldn't die now. He should live and experience the same suffering that we do." At that moment, they saw Marlin and his team heading toward the battlefield filled with monsters. Arnold asked, "What should we do? Should we run away?" Lara replied, "Even if we run, the dragon's power will destroy the city and kill all of us." Arnold nodded and said, "Then we'll fight alongside them." Lost asked Narcina to remain behind because she was the sleeping princess, and he didn't want the dragon to harm her. Then, everyone rushed into action. Lost headed toward Mist's body while Armia launched a small fireball to draw their attention. Mist turned toward them and summoned enormous branches from the earth that completely surrounded them. Lost asked Armia for help. He climbed onto a large rock while Armia used a flying spell to reach him. However, Mist noticed their plan and drove one of the branches through Armia's body. Lost fell to the ground as blood covered the area. Narcina watched everything unfold, frozen in place and unable to decide what she should do. Han said to her, "Go look at your beloved. If you don't move now, then when will you?" Narcina immediately ran toward Lost and cried over him while Lara desperately tried to heal him. But sadly, nothing worked. At that moment, Narcina made her decision and stood firmly. Arnold asked, "What are you planning to do?" She answered, "There is no other solution anymore. I'll go to the dragon and let it eat me." Arnold replied, "Do you really think that's a practical solution? Even if the dragon eats you, it will only calm down for 10 or 15 years. She responded, "It doesn't matter. It's not a long time, but it's not short either. I'm certain that during that period, Lost will find the hero who can defeat the dragon." Then she stepped forward and called out to the dragon, "Come here, my dear. Weren't you looking for me? Here I am." At that exact moment, Lost began regaining consciousness due to Lara's healing. When he saw Narcina walking toward the dragon, he transformed once again. But this wasn't the weak transformation from before. He returned stronger than ever. He seized the dragon and began breaking its bones mercilessly, crushing them left and right with terrifying force. Arnold stared in disbelief and said, "There's no way he'll ever return to normal after this." Narcina stood there in shock and desperately called out to him, begging him to come back to his senses, but he wouldn't respond. He only regained awareness after she approached him and took hold of his hand. At the very moment the dragon was about to escape, Hans shouted, "Quickly, Lost, finish it!" Lost drew his dagger, but he hesitated. Narcina grasped his hand and said, "Let's do it together. We'll share the burden of this sin so you won't have to bear the pain alone." Together, they delivered the final blow to the dragon. The dragon was dragged away from that place, and with it vanished the magical energy that had caused the monster rebellion. Every monster disappeared from the city, and peace finally returned as the city regained its former state. Each person returned to the one they loved. A message eventually reached Narcina's father, informing him that the dragon had died and that Narcina was safe alongside Lost. In the end, Narcina inherited Mist's position within the guild, and Lost finally confessed that he wanted her to remain by his side for the rest of his life, even throughout his journey to search for the valiant hero. Narcina smiled and replied, "You finally said it. You've been putting it off for the entire story." And from that moment onward, Narcina set out alongside Lost on a brand new journey. Thus, the first part of our anime comes to an end. If you enjoyed Lost's story and want to see part 2, let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss anything new. Until next time, take care, and I'll see you all in another video.